Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Christian County near Edinburg, where a retired police officer and his wife have turned their passion for police work, police patches and insignias into a successful business. During this program, we're going to get to see an enormous collection of police patches. We're also going to see how they've turned this into a successful business and hear a very interesting story about their participation, their presence at the 9/11 catastrophe. Andrew Nelson, you've had a very interesting life up to this point. You were an NYPD police officer many years, weren't you?
Yes, I was, 20 years.
You were actually there when 9/11 occurred. And in fact, much of the work that we see, the police patches that you and your wife have built, reflect some of that, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. How did your presence with the NYPD on that day influence you?
In regards to the insignia, especially the ones that we do for the NYPD, there's a deeper meaning for me personally as far as the design goes, because I knew several of the people that were lost on 9/11. So as we do the designs, that's reflected in it.
Yeah. And in fact, some of the designs that you come up with and that they approve actually memorialize some of the officers that died that day. And we have one of them right here, don't we?
Yes.
Explain to me how this is laid out and how this memorializes those guys.
Well, this is from the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit Truck Number 3 up in the Bronx. And on each of the stars, you will see the initials, and those are the initials of the members of Truck 3 that were lost on 9/11. JD is Jerome Dominguez, VD is Vinnie Dans, and WW is Walt Weaver.
And this is just an example of some of your later work. We've also got some examples here of some of the first things that you did. And boy, this field has changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
This is one of your original designs. This is for the City of New York Marching Band insignia. And this is actually the finished product right here.
That's correct.
It's pretty attractive, but it's pretty simplistic, isn't it, compared to what you're able to do nowadays?
The technology that was around in 1992 when we first did that design has grown exponentially.
It sure has. And you've actually been, I guess, the beneficiary of this remarkable digital conversion, haven't you?
Yes.
Because everything you do now, you don't have to put a pen to paper anymore, do you?
No, everything is done on the computer. All of the designs that we do, we can bring elements in, we can take them out, and what used to take a session of actually drawing the patch can now be done in a matter of minutes. When a customer says, well, I'd like to change that, I'd like to improve that, we can do that almost, instantaneously. You
and your wife have designed as many as maybe more than 500
500 patches.
That's a pretty darn good business. All over the world. I want to show some of these. This is a hoot. The Baghdad Embassy Security Force. How did you get involved with that?
That was actually through a gentleman I knew in the U.S. State Department Diplomatic Security Service, and their Baghdad Embassy needed new patches for the uniforms.
Here's one from Spain, Grupo Madrid.
And that is a riot unit from Madrid, Spain. A friend of mine is in that unit, and we've done a lot of patches actually for the Spain UIP.
And here's one from Tyrol, Austria, I think is
correct.
Where Tyrol is.
Yep.
And you have a lot of German connections, don't you?
German, Austrian, Spanish, yes.
Oh, here, close to home too. How about Stonington? It's just right down the road, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you and your wife, I guess, lived there for a period of time.
Yes, we did.
But now you're near Edinburg, and you're actually working on one for the Edinburg PD, aren't you?
Yes, we are. It should be ready probably by next month. They'll be wearing it.
Can you show it? Show it to us? Well, actually, before we go to Edinburg, let's see what you've got up there, because this shows sort of a part of the method, doesn't it?
The process
on
the process. There. This is what we do here, and I'll bring this up for you, and we can see it a little bit more. This is actually their truck. And so what we do is we try to, because every truck in New York City differs slightly depending on where they're assigned, and when the year of the truck came out. So we want the patch that we do not just to represent a generic, but actually their vehicle. And so you can see it in the striping and the positioning of decals and everything. But this will show you, we take a design and these are the changes, and this will all get submitted in, and then the finished product will come out and
if
looks
you would
like that.
Hold that right
Sure.
there so we can get a good shot of it. Now, there's something interesting about this too. That sphere behind,
That's
very detailed.
yes.
And in some cases it wouldn't, this proves that's a good product, right?
Yes, what you can see here is this was the design that we received from them, and you can see that it's a drawing, and they didn't really grasp. Now that Unisphere, which you could actually see in the movie Men in Black, is from the World's Fair in New York City. So as we did that, our goal was to take that blob and actually
That's what it looks like.
and depict it. So if you close out from there, you can see that
yeah.
that is actually the Unisphere
Yeah.
that we've captured in that image.
So the reason that police departments like your work is because of your attention to detail.
Well, I wore the uniform for 20 years, and what separates us from a lot of other companies is the fact that, having worn it, I don't want an ugly patch on an officer's uniform. I don't want them to have an insignia that I wouldn't be proud to wear. So when I do the designs, I make sure that we pay attention to the detail and the symbology, that we get it right, where other companies will just take a design and go, okay, and they're not worried too much about the end look. They're not wearing it. Having worn it, that's something that's important to me.
In your experience, and this is true of everybody, you bring your personal experiences to work with you, and they mean a lot, don't
Yes.
they? They really mean a lot. And your wife, she does a lot of this design work too, doesn't she?
Yes,
Nancy?
she does. It's actually, when the business was started, it actually came about. I had done the two designs for the marching band back in 1992 and 1994. And that was my foray into it. But after 9/11, when my hours were so chaotic, my wife had left her job. And we were discussing it because she collects mounted patches. I've always collected since I was a rookie cop. And she was commenting about a patch. And I made the comment back to her, well, if you think you can do better, go right ahead. And she did.
She did, right?
So Huntsman Enterprises, while she'll complain that I do the lion's share of the work, actually is her baby. She took it and she made it what it was, or what it is today.
Yeah.
So yeah, she does a very active role in it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I want to show this too, because you mentioned her collection. And I just want to turn this around just a little bit, just to show. She was a bug on horses, wasn't
Yes,
she?
she was.
She just loved horses, and so she started collecting any mounted patrol or mounted unit that she could find. And this is going to be a remarkable program, because this is just a tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And you have, well, I'm not even going to hazard a guess at how many patches you have, but you have a whole room full of them.
Yes.
And excuse me, and we're going to get a chance to see those and maybe hear some of the stories about those involved. So as we go through this program, we'll meet Nancy. We'll find out how she not only makes these, but she makes T-shirts that
Yes.
have that like this
She
one
does that, yeah.
that has that on there. And we'll hear some of your stories. And you're also an author, and we'll talk a little
Yes,
bit
I am.
about your books. All
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Nancy, you got all this started, this whole business of designing these patches. I'm showing some of your some of the work that you kind of like, because it's a little different. These local Illinois departments are a little different than the big city departments, aren't they?
Yes,
They're kind of
they
like
are.
the more of a folk art, don't they?
Yes.
You like these pretty well, don't you? These are they give you an artistic outlet, don't they?
Yes, they do. And my family, being from Illinois, they really do mean a lot for me personally.
This one, I like this one. Concerns of Cop Survivors, Cops. And Karnak, Illinois. Marshall County Sheriff. West Frankfort. Kenosha. That's up in Wisconsin. Interesting, very, very interesting. How did you get started in collecting?
Well, Andrew and I were dating long distance. He lived in New York. I lived here in Illinois. And he, just in talking, I asked him what his hobbies were. He said patch collecting. And I said, really? Well, do you have any other manly hobbies? Because I was thinking that wasn't very manly. And so he sent me one of these patches. It's a mounted patch, and he knew that I was a horse lover, and that pretty much sealed the deal.
Oh,
for
okay.
me.
And again, New York City Police Department,
Yes,
the mounted unit, and then it got you going, huh?
Yes, it did.
And so you have now. I'm holding one book. How many of these books do you
I
have?
think I have 5 now.
I'm surprised there are that many mounted units that there's that much to
I
collect.
still have more to get.
Oh, do you really?
Yes, I do. I go to
Wow.
shows and I still find new ones.
Mm-hmm. Tremendous, tremendous. Well, we'll see more of your collection and Andrew's later on. I think I mentioned that not only do you design and sell the patches, but you do T-shirts now as well,
Yes.
and polo shirts and those kinds of things. They have the insignias on them. That's a whole different side of the business.
Yes.
You've been doing that for about 10 years, though.
Yes.
And it's worked out well for you.
Yes, it's nice to be able to work from home and
Yeah.
do things on a, as a need-be basis for other cops around all over the world. Really.
I'm sure everybody's imagining you right now with your needlework on your knees, just going like crazy, but it's not like that, is it?
No, it isn't.
No. Explain to us how it works.
Well, I actually get a digitized image up on my computer. Digitizing is very time consuming and it's hard to do, but with this program, it has all the different elements that you need to do a design. And then there's a cord that runs over to this machine, and all I do is take a card.
Well, that thing's a monster, man. That thing looks like it.
Very intimidating.
I'll bet. I wouldn't want to get my hand stuck under that thing. That's for sure.
I have one time. I've stitched a finger. That was only one time. I learned quick.
That's remarkable. And look at all the different colors of threads that you have available to use. That's cool. And you've had this thing for several years now.
10 years.
Good deal. Good deal. Got it paid off, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. So let's say the image goes from your computer screen,
Right.
and you program it into the
Right.
monster.
I come over here to this panel and I plug in the numbers that I decide of which threads I'm going to use for this design, which happens to be the NYPD insignia. And after I plug it in, I set it, adjust my head right here to the right area.
In this case, you're putting together a T-shirt for me.
Yes, I am.
And you said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, how about that New York PD logo? And you said, okay, so that's what we're working on.
And then I
right?
said, let's do it subdued
Okay.
so that it's really nice. So then we just hit start and the machine goes.
And it knows what to do because it's got the digitized program already fed into it.
Yes.
And this'll
let's
take
slow
what-
it down a little bit so it's
Okay,
not so
so
loud.
we can actually see how it does what it does. So this is actually embroidered with
And we're
different
not doing
colors of
subdued.
thread.
I lied. We're doing color.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. I like color.
But can you imagine the people back in the old days that stitched this by hand? Because that's how patches were done, by
Yeah,
hand.
yeah.
And now they have machines, and these are the actual machines that do our patches. But they have them set up in rows, just 20 machines together.
Yeah.
And they do it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. Well, let's let this thing work, and
Okay.
then you say it'll take about 10 minutes to
Yes,
do one of those. We'll come back and we'll take a look at the finished product later in the
Okay.
program, okay?
Sounds good.
Andrew, let's go back to your time with the NYPD for just a little bit. These 3 badges at the bottom were yours, right? What's this one here?
That's my police officer shield,
And this one?
detective,
Detective. And this one?
sergeant. Sergeant.
And these others are from highly positioned officers in the NYPD, huh?
That's correct.
Okay. We mentioned this just briefly, Andrew, about your where you were and what happened on 9/11. And it was an interesting story because you were telling me that you finally had decided that you were going to quit smoking.
Yes.
And it happened to be on that day that you found, I don't think I can do this anymore. I think I'm going to have to start smoking
That's
again.
correct, yeah.
And this was on September 11th, 2001.
Yes.
What happened?
Well, it was election day back in New York, and part of my responsibility in the unit that I worked in was doing election supervising. And what we would do is we would go around to all of the different polling places, and we would check in with the officer that was there, make sure there were no problems. And at this time, I was in the eastern half of Brooklyn when the first plane struck. And like I tell people, that wasn't something that registered any red flags at the time it happened, because if you're familiar with the area of Lower Manhattan, it's bordered by the Hudson River and the East River, and that's all uncontrolled airspace, or at the time it was. So you have all of these planes and helicopters flying back and forth, and so they never reported in with the tower. So the thought was inevitably something was going to happen.
Yeah.
On that day, I had just quit smoking a week before, and so when the decision was made that we were going in after the second plane had struck, I called up my wife and I said, "I'm just letting you know, I'm quitting." She had some other choice words about me going in, but
Right, a rather stressful situation here, right?
Yes, yeah. I believe her comment was, "Well, you don't have your vest on." And I said, "Well, honey, they're flying planes into buildings. My vest isn't really going to do me a lot of good." So I went to a tobacco store to get my brand of cigarettes, which was Marlboro Ultralight 100s.
Pretty common brand.
Very common.
Yeah.
They didn't have them. So I was kind of a little bit, incredulous. And I come out to my car, and my driver says, "We ready to go?" And I said, "No, they didn't have my brand." So I said, "Go to the gas station across the street," and we did, and I got my brand, and we headed in. Well, as we were approaching the tunnel, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, there was a fire truck that was parked in a toll plaza, and a fireman jumped out of the truck, held his hands up, and stopped our car as we were getting ready to go through. I didn't know what was happening. I was about to say some choice words to him when I saw this plume of smoke come flying out of the inbound tunnel where we were heading into. And my first reaction was they hit the tunnel. So we ultimately got our way back over up north and through the Brooklyn Bridge. It wasn't until about a week later, as I was watching the video feeds of everything, because I hadn't seen anything, I realized that we were pulling up to the tunnel when the South Tower went down. If I hadn't stopped for those cigarettes and we had gone straight in, we would have been pulling up at the base of the South Tower just as it came down, and we wouldn't be having this interview.
Wow, and that was only like a block from where the building had come down. Yeah, you'd be dead. You'd be dead.
What we saw was the force of all of that smoke and debris that was coming down as the tower came down and pushing through the tunnel.
Yeah.
So,
my goodness. What a horrible memory.
And unfortunately, it's one of those things where I say, smoking isn't always bad for you.
Right.
It depends on how God uses it.
It saved your life that day.
Yes,
my
it did.
Goodness. Oh, what a story. In addition to these patches that you have been collecting for years, you collect any police paraphernalia, including badges. And this is interesting because this is a sampling of people who protect the President of the United States.
That's correct.
Which one of these are curious to you or to people who look at your collection?
Well, you have a sampling of it. This badge here is an inaugural badge, and every 4 years they design a badge that's worn for the inauguration of the President of the United States.
Is that right? Every 4 years?
Every 4 years.
Okay.
And this is from the Secret Service. This was back when Bill Clinton was president. You, over in the far corner, you have the bicentennial, which was in 1992. Again, these were all worn by an officer of the Uniform Division.
Okay.
These two on either side are from the military aides to the president. You'll see them at Marine One, Air Force One, holding the football. And this is worn by aides to the president. The one in white is worn by aides to the vice president.
Okay.
Here you have a bicentennial badge from 1976. That is the anniversary of the White House there.
Okay.
And then these two on the bottom are actually from the Uniform Division back in the 70s when it was known as the Executive Protective Service.
Before it was called Secret Service.
Well, before it was called Uniform Division. It was always the Secret Service, but it was the Executive Protective Service, EPS. Then they decided it was because there was confusion about what exactly were you. So they just changed it to the United States Secret Service Uniform Division.
This up here is a sampling of things that you and Nancy have designed.
Part of it, yes.
Some of them look familiar to me. And this is sort of has an international flavor. And these have you designed these as well?
No, these are insignia of the West German, or German at the time, a lot of it was West German, of the Grenzschutz Group 9, which is the German Federal Police Anti-Terrorism Unit. They gained their notoriety back in Mogadishu when they rescued hostages from a hijacked jetliner.
And I'm going to ask you to hold this because it's too precious for me to hold, but this is, you're also a World War II bug.
Yes, I am.
And this is really rare, isn't it?
Yes, this is actually a World War II, what they call a shako, which was a sort of like a dress helmet hat worn by the police, the gendarmerie of the German era. And you can tell that it's gendarmerie and not regular police by the brown coloring on there.
Andrew, I asked you to get out just a small sampling of the many, many, many binders of these insignias that you have, patches that you have. It's incredible. I mean, you picked a good thing to collect because you can put a lot of things in a small area.
Yes, you can.
Some of the people that I interview have barns full of stuff, and you don't need that kind of storage space. But it's remarkable how much you can put in a closet. And we take a look here. I said, well, pick out something that has a good story attached to it. He said, well, this first canine patch at NYPD has a good story attached to it.
Yes,
It's
it
interesting.
does. Yes. This comes back from the 1980s, and this was the very first patch that K9 used. And it was only worn for 60 days because the chief of department at the time saw it and told them, you're not big enough to be a unit, take it off. And that was the history of that first patch.
It sounds like New York attitude. It
pretty
sure
much,
does.
yes. Yes.
It's not big enough. Get rid of it.
No. And here you have an example of a patch probably that dates back to around the turn of the 20th century, and it's from the harbor unit. And you can tell the difference between the later version, which is commercially stitched, and this one, which is actually 3 separate components. It's got a black wool background, a blue felt anchor, and the fouling is all chain stitched. And basically at that time, there was an example that was maintained at headquarters, and when you needed a patch for your unit, or when you got transferred into it, you would take the sample or go with the sample to your local embroiderer, who would then do the patch. And so every one of them is different.
Everyone's different because each one's handmade.
Yes.
I'll be darned. And this would have been the late 1800s?
Late 1800s into the early part of the 20th century, yeah.
Fascinating. You know, and we always think that, well, anything that's made officially is probably perfect, right, from the get-go?
No.
But that's not the case at all, especially, you would think that the Secret Service would have their hand, you know, would have attention to detail, but that doesn't always happen either, does it?
And this goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is when you have a manufacturer who has no affiliation and somebody like us who has worn the uniform and is aware of the symbology. And what you have here is a uniform division of the Secret Service regulation patch, and each star is supposed to represent one of the states of the Union. And unfortunately, this one has 54 stars.
Wow.
So
that actually makes it very valuable for you, though, doesn't it? Because that would have never been worn.
Actually, they were worn.
They were?
They did actually make
They
it out
didn't catch it.
For a very brief period of time.
Oh,
They were circulated, yes.
You know, I always wonder when I talk to collectors, I wonder, well, how the heck does all this happen? Well, collectors know other collectors.
Yes.
Right? And you have a fondness for the German patches.
Yes, I do.
And somebody in Germany has a fondness for U.S. patches. So you guys trade, don't you?
Yes, we do. And this is an example of a trade. When we go big or go home, these are all SWAT patches from Germany, from all of the different states.
This is from Dortmund. We're looking at one here from Mecklenburg. My German's not very good, so I'll probably not be pronouncing some of these. The Dortmund Phoenix. Interesting. And are you going to, every one of these has some value to you, right?
Yes. And their patches are very similar to our ESU patches. Every unit has a different design for it. So, and they're like M&Ms. Once you have one, you've got to have all of them.
Actually, it's good for your business too, because the more designs, the better, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And as a collector, it's always interesting to get something new.
I also talked about you've become an author at your wife's insistence.
Yes, I have.
Got a copy of your book here. Is this your first book? Perfect
This is the first.
Pawn?
Yes.
Okay. But you're pretty prolific because this was self-published in 2013.
That's correct.
You've already got a second one.
Yes, I do.
Completed. Is it at the editor now?
It's at the editor now, and hopefully we'll have it released in March.
Tell me about the book. What's it about?
Well, the story is about Perfect Pawn is a retired New York City police detective, and the character is fictional, but it's based loosely on my career. And he's retired, running his own company, and he finds out that his former high school flame has gone missing from a one-car accident up in upstate New York. And when he gets up there, he realizes that no one is interested in finding out what happened to her, including her husband, who's the county sheriff. He starts to investigate it and begins to realize things aren't what they seem. And the whole thing is he needs to find out who was behind this before he becomes the next target.
Okay. And your key guy is James McGuire, right?
Yes.
And he's going to be in all of your books.
Yes.
He's your protagonist.
Yes, he is.
Okay. And loosely based on your career. They always say you should write what you know.
Well, one of the things that has always bothered me, and my wife can attest to this, they won't watch anything that has to do with NYPD with me because I pick it apart.
That would never happen.
Exactly.
That would never happen.
and when you've worn the uniform for 20 years, you realize that, they're not always right. And so when I wrote this book, it was to give people an inside look into the NYPD and New York City that most people will never see.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Nancy, when we left this machine, it didn't look like anything. It just looked like a black shirt.
Right.
And it's finished now. What's the next step in the process?
I just will take it off the machine, take it off of the hoop, take the hoop out of the back, and you have a shirt.
Oh, isn't that something? And you could embroider anything, couldn't you? Not just a shirt, but you could do this to almost any piece
Anything
of
that I
clothing.
can put on my machine.
Yeah, isn't that nifty? Thank you so much. That's really neat. I'll have a novel to read, and I'll have a new shirt to wear. Thanks to the Nelsons for being so hospitable to us and showing us their collection today. With another Illinois story in Edinburg with a flavor of New York. I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send $19.95 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.